Hey YouTube, it's Petey Two Finger. I'm here to talk about the proper way for me to troubleshoot my guitar rigs. This is not the proper way for you. You have a completely different way of doing it. So first off, we have this. This is the beep beep cont, we call it. Or no, this is the bitches love my switches. This is a test tone oscillator, and here is a test amp. Now this is a great test amp. This is the one that I really recommended, not because it sounds like a Dumble or a Black Flag JTM 45. This is a great test amp because of its size, because it'll fit in your guitar case. So what you do when there's a problem, let's say you're playing guitar and then all of a sudden you have a problem and your guitar signal chain is complicated. Maybe it runs through a pedal board, maybe it runs through some splitters or switch boxes, preamps, you name it. Guitar stuff can get complicated, and the way that I wire stuff up, yeah, it gets goofy. So what I need to do, let's say all of a sudden it's humming, is disconnect the guitar and plug in the signal generator into where the guitar normally goes. Then you can take this amp and go to the end or the last point that has a 1/4 inch connection and plug this in. And if you're getting it there, well, typically what I'll find is you would plug it in and you wouldn't get it there. So then you would go to the next 1/4 inch jack and plug this in, and the next 1/4 inch jack, and the next. And when you get to one where you've got it, that means the one just after that is where the failure point is. So you use the test tone oscillator is to replace the idea of having to have someone hit or strum the guitar. This is so you can freely get around and operate without troubleshooting with a guitar strapped around your neck, because that does not work. That does not work. Like when this happened, I didn't turn the monitor on. Like I should have taken my headphones and guitar off, instantly plugged the guitar into this, and I didn't do any of that. So it took a while for me to determine where the fault was, and it was a cable that needed to be cut and resoldered. I found that if I put any weight, if I put my foot on it, boom, I would step kind of hard in this one spot in the living room, in the practice area. All of a sudden the guitar would just start humming, and it was this vibration. It was actually the output of the tuner. There's a 90 guitar jack there, and when I unscrewed that, I couldn't believe what I saw, how bad the work was. Everything was scrunched together and touching. There was a point where it was hard shorting, so that was creating this loud hum. This system that I'm talking about, it's got two switch boxes for the guitar. There's a switch box on the front end, and there's a switch box on the back end around in between a multi-effector. And what that enables me to do is to have one guitar over here, one guitar that's always plugged in, or another cable in the practice area, and I just turn this switch and it will select which guitar cable goes to the input of the Nux. Now maybe that's not the best signal chain, like when you talk about cork sniffing of, getting the best signal. I put a buffer coming right off of the one that really matters. The one that really matters is the one that's going through the board. That's our band practice thing. The other one, it doesn't really matter. It's for writing music and coming out of these crappy amps. So I didn't put a preamp or a line driver on that before it hits the switch, coming out of the multi-effector, that output goes to this switch box, which is like a Radio Shack, like a video switch box, and you just don't use the video connections. So if I go here, here is sends it over to the mixer. If I go this switch, it sends it over to a pair of amps here. And I had just replaced this. This switch box is kind of low profile and small. I had a bigger one that was on there, and I had gotten rid of that. And then I tested the power because it's a single clicky-clacky switch here. That turns on the new X, the multi-effector, and this pair of amps. And when I put my meter on it to check the voltage, it was 7.42 volts. It was kind of low. And that was fine to power the new Zoom G1. I had the Zoom G1 running on 7 volts. There's a selector, there's an option in there to run it on nickel metal hydride batteries, which are not 1.5 volts, they're 1.3. And I had that engaged. So it was running off 7 volts, no problem. Now this, the new XMG300 the new one, it didn't like that. It would play for maybe 20 minutes and then there would be a loud popping sound come over the headphones, and then it would reset itself on the first patch with no audio. And I would have to come over here, shut it off, and turn it back on. So why am I explaining all this to you? Well, I'll tell you. I replaced that power supply and I replaced the switch box, and then I'm finding when I put any weight on my foot in this area of the apartment, it would cut out. So that naturally tended to make me think that the problem area was over here. But then I thought, oh, dude, you just went and put in that new switch box and that new power supply. I bet your problem's over here. And the mistake that I made was not taking my headphones off and putting the monitor on. I kept my guitar on and the headphones and came over here and started tearing everything apart and trying substituting cables. I had this one because there's a green one that comes out of the multi-effect into the switch box, or vice versa. And I was like, ripping that out and just kind of getting frustrated, when really the tools that serve you best, and if you don't have this stuff, you can build all of it. Like building yourself a little mini amp. The way that you do that is you go and find a tiny speaker at the resale store and then build the amp into it. You can look up Noisy Cricket, Little Gem, or actually the Punch amp is the one I recommend. The 7052A is the name of that chip. So having this really small thing that you can plug in and unplug a pedal and plug this in and see if you got it. And if it's still bad, you unplug this, plug that cable back in where it was, and then go to the next pedal that's closer to the input, closer to the guitar, and keep doing that. Unplug the output and plug it in and see if you got it. And when you get to the one where you got it and there isn't any more issue, you know that it's just before that is where the problem is. And you'll be able to isolate it that way and eliminate that cable, or maybe it's a problem with the jack. You never know until you get in there and troubleshoot and experiment. So it's things like jiggling the cable, jiggling the different ways of doing the jiggle test. You can use a cable tester, but these are the two tools that you're going to need. You can make a signal generator. You can look up RG Keen's Quick and Dirty Test Oscillator. That's what this is. You could even build a 555 chip oscillator. If you don't care what it sounds like, those are a dime a dozen. You can find those circuits very easily. I like a triangle or a sine wave. I don't like a square wave. But they're harder to find, and they're maybe a little bit more parts count. But if you don't care what your test tone oscillator sounds like, you can make one with a 555 IC or a 40106. It's kind of overkill. But you could easily build one of those into like a pill container with a 9-volt battery. Stuff it with some excess foam rubber to keep stuff from jiggling around in there. Cut in a single guitar jack that serves as the switch running the ground from the 9-volt battery through the tip connector of the female 6.3.5 millimeter jack, and you're off to the races. You know, if you build yourself or find a small amp like this, and you have a small signal generator, this is kind of big. Keep those in your in with your gig bag or your guitar case, and then when that day comes, because I'm telling you, it usually only happens when people are there. Like, your shit will run fine for the longest time, and then when you have a gig or people are there or it's an important thing, it'll break down. So having like this and this makes me completely independent. I can solve the problem of my stuff going down, because the other option is you kind of need someone to help you. You need someone to play the guitar while you go and unplug the cables, or and if you don't have either one of these, you're taking a spare cable and literally going through everything and replacing it to see if you can get that spare cable to find the one that's bad. That's the alternative way to do this. And you can do it that way, that's fine. But in my mind, that there's so much extraneous noise, and like with the unplugging and the plugging, the popping noise, that you're going to piss everybody off, including the sound man. So having something like this little tiny thing that's a private personal amp that's not going to bother anybody, it's not loud, you know, it's going to be quiet while you're making all this racket, and then a pleasing signal generator with a volume control is, you know, there's all different ways to do this. You can build it to be quiet. You can put a switch on it and switch in some resistors if you don't want to run a pot. If you're trying to make it really small, that's not the point. The point is having these two tools, whatever version of them you prescribe. You know, mine has a big ass volume knob on it, and I like that. So when you do this, having a volume knob on it is nice, but it's not necessary, of course. So those are the two tools that I like to use to troubleshoot. I just wanted to tell that story about how I oftentimes I'll regress. I'll just get mad. I'll be like frustrated, like, I just spent all this time. I did that power supply replacement, which actually my wife did the hard work on that. I went and got everything and tested it. She pulled the wire up and pulled it out because I have a bad back. But yeah, I just went through this process of fixing all this stuff, and then it broke down again, and it hadn't broke down in the longest time, and then it wasn't, you know, I got angry and I thought, oh, the reason it broke down is because I just did all that work. And that's the other part of this video, is don't let yourself fall into that stinking thinking that where you think you know, because I've shown myself to be wrong so many times when I think I know what it is, you know. And it's weird because there's other times where I will be right. I'll be right. So the more important point of this is that if I would have grabbed the right tools, if I would have taken the guitar off and plugged the signal generator in and plugged a new cable, a fresh cable, into the output of the effect, I would have had, I wouldn't have got it. It would have been messed up. And then I would have been able to discount all that other switching BS that I thought it was. And I would have been in a much better place, and I wouldn't have wasted all that time. But I didn't do that, because typically that's another thing, is going maybe right in the middle. Going right in the middle at first and saying, okay, we're going to cut half of this bullshit out of here in the first test, and do that first test, and you're like, okay, we got it here, or we don't got it here, and then you know which way you got to go with it. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, you guys. And again, you don't have to have exactly the same stuff as me. Uh, Whatever you have for a signal generator, a an MP3 Walkman can work just as good with the proper cable. So there you go. Don't these are concepts. They're not laws, and how you implement those concepts is all up to you. And that's what makes this hobby so fun. Is working with what you already have. Ultimately, save a buck and have fun. Okay, you guys, happy troubleshooting. If that can be a thing. If you're a pedal guy and you've got a bunch of pedals, I'm sure you know that feeling of when you need your stuff to work and it goes down, how that can just shoot a hole in your heart rather quickly. So here's to better times, right? Take care of yourselves and have a great weekend. We're cooking some ribs. We're gonna smoke some ribs. Fetters is cheap is on tonight. Rob Fetters, my favorite guitar player, and we're jamming today. So good day for me. All right, you guys. Hug your pets.